Pharmaceutical Processing, in conjunction with INTERPHEX 2017, presents INTERPHEX Live.
Good morning, New York. So here we are again, INTERPHEX 2017. So leading off, we're going to be talking about realizing benefits and efficiencies in quality systems. Ironically, we took the first 5 minutes to not only clean up the systems up here, but also to correct all my spelling errors. So hey, quality systems at work. So we're on our way. Okay, we have Jeff Meltzer from Trevena and Aaron Weinstein from IPS. So we're going to lead off here. So having spent a considerable amount of time at large pharmaceutical companies in my history, one of the things that I always used to tell the guys in our quality group was, I never work without a net. So that's, take it from me. Anytime I'd be working out, you'll be working off site, it was always the quality guys that had our backs. One of the worst ones is that, you know, when you get into a system that has no system, and you're working out at a contractor, it's usually whose opinion reigns supreme. And it's amazing how people do things because they think it's right as opposed to the way you do it. So at Novartis, we set down the rules that if it ain't done our way, it's wrong by definition. I'm not sure if that's a quality system, but we're going to talk about that today. So what I hope to do is let's define what an efficient quality system is. So Aaron, why don't you lead off?
An efficient quality system, it has a lot in common with other efficient systems in the sense that you have information and decisions that have to be made as part of the quality group, and information needs to flow in as part of that. And it is very important for that to happen in an efficient and quick manner, so that those decisions can be made and put forward. So an efficient system is one where you have all the aspects of a quality system, including policies, guidelines, procedures, software, and data, all flowing into the quality group. And so the quality group can make the appropriate decisions and in a timely fashion using the right level of data.
So we're not waiting for a decision, is what I'm hearing.
That is one of the keys.
Okay.
Waiting for a decision or making a decision based off of information that is not timely are things that contribute to inefficiency in a quality group.
You know, one of the things I've always found is that sometimes there's a disconnect. So Jeff, like, you know, we work across all kinds of landscapes, you know, as your job is running quality. So how do you connect these guys together so that you get the efficient system we're talking about?
Well, there's a variety of things you need to do. A lot of it is, you mentioned contractors. In my business, we do a lot of outsourcing. It's a virtual model. And so a lot of it is building the relationships, setting common expectations. Some of that's with quality agreements. A lot of that's with face-to-face meetings, regular conference calls, because you are going to have things in, for example, a sponsor quality system versus a contractor quality system that may not totally align. Doesn't make either one right or wrong, but it's finding the common ground to move forward and find what I would prefer to say is effective solutions, not just efficient solutions, to prevent problems. And that's what a lot of this is. When we talk about creating standard processes for decision points, it's good to have, a lot of what we do is setting up standard processes to reduce variability, get common understanding, and then a lot of where we spend our time after we set up those systems in operations is dealing with when things don't go in a standard way. And even then, there should be a standard way to deal with the non-standard, so that we do risk assessments and we make the best decisions possible to assure data integrity and patient safety, which is what we have to keep in mind with all of these things that we do, that and of course compliance.
One of the things I've always found is that you can have a quality agreement, and that's, you know, but that's usually, I found that usually gets finalized, I'm 6 months down the road already, you know?
So a lot of the contractors I'm working with now won't make the first GMP batch without the quality agreement. We'll do some engineering batches prior to that while the quality agreement is getting finalized. And I think that's a good practice. But the other thing, just a reality check on quality agreements. I heard it likened, and this is in contracts, but it's the same thing, to marriage, where basically you don't need a good contract for a good marriage, you need a good contract for a good divorce. So really it's about setting expectations. If you're going to go back to the quality agreement to resolve real conflicts, I mean, it's one thing to understand expectations, but to resolve real conflicts, you're way down the road and there's other issues that are going to come up. It's really about getting out in front, making sure people understand who's buying what, who's responsible for which supplier is going into the process, who's responsible for what testing, who's responsible for what regulatory reporting, and getting that common expectation so that there isn't misunderstandings later on.
So Jeff, what I'm hearing is that you should have a working agreement before you got a quality agreement. I mean, it's about relationships, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, a lot of times we'll start out with some of the development work and building those relationships and being on site before we ever get to a quality agreement. It usually becomes one of those items in our pre-GMP work that is on the checklist of production readiness.
So when does the working agreement kind of kick in when you walk into a contractor? Just to give me a sense. You walk in, you want them to make whatever.
So usually we'll start out with doing some, people call due diligence visits or pre-qualification visits, where we will see capabilities, understand how the organization is set up, how it works, and really get a sense of if they can fulfill our requirements. We'll then proceed with getting those agreements, those working agreements, as you call them, or business agreements in place. And part of those have the understanding that a quality agreement will follow. And again, like I said, before GMP work begins usually.
Well, one of the things that, the reason I'm building this up to is we're going to be covering this on quality agreements and metrics tomorrow. And one of the discussion points we're going to have on Wednesday with Joe McGinnis is data integrity. So I guess my next question is data integrity, you got working agreement, we're trying to get the job done, but we also want to pass the Snicker test. We want to make sure that should there be a divorce, we got that covered. But more importantly, that we have the development history documented. So having said that, with the data integrity and become a focus, obviously, with FDA. So, how can increased data integrity actually contribute to an efficient quality system, Aaron, considering what Jeff was talking about?
So, first of all, because it has become a regulatory focus, a strong and good data integrity program will allow you to get through regulatory pieces like inspections and other items relatively quickly, because you can demonstrate that your data is not only sound and good, but it has been kept secure. So just from that standpoint alone, just from a regulatory standpoint, it really, having a good program allows that data to be used and for what it needs to be used for, which is to demonstrate whether it's just some formulation, whether it's to demonstrate that training has been done effectively. Whatever that data is, the more you show that it is safe and secure, the easier it is to use and to get through that process. So that's number one. So you're spending less time with regulatory bodies and more time on the real on what should be the real focus of quality, which is getting product out the door that is safe and effective. And then on top of that, again, it goes back to decision making. If you know that your data is safe and secure, and that what you're receiving is the data that you need, then decision making, you have more faith in the decision making process. You know you're making a decision based on strong data, and that really allows the system to move forward more effectively. If you internally or a regulatory body externally is questioning the data, then you start to definitely lose efficiency and as Jeff was saying, effectiveness of the overall system.
So, like, what areas would you see? Like, one of the things that we're talking about is within the quality system. Are there areas that require data in a more timely basis, or
Yes. One area that would be a good place to go is if you are getting microbiological data. for a facility and the area and the processing. Having that data, in some cases, some companies have it down. They have a system that goes well, and anyone can, within the quality group, can look at that data and understand it. On the other hand, some companies, they still rely on older methods like paper reporting, et cetera, and that really can reduce the efficiency, because you might find out even later than the normal growth rate. So it'll take, let's say, 5 or 7 days to understand the growth within that sample. Well, it may take even longer for the reporting to finally make it through and for decisions to be made. That's one area that I can think of, and I know it's a very specific one.
I'll chime in with an area that is something that we deal with, and it's on the clinical side, not necessarily on the manufacturing side, but the need for clinical sites to enter their data into our electronic data collection system and other ETMF systems. If it takes a month or two to get data in, if there's issues with a patient, or if there are issues systemically with the way the site is implementing the protocol, we don't find out for a month, or we can find out the next week. And we sometimes do that by incentivizing the sites and saying those folks that get their data in and get better compensation. Certainly there's things we do also with ranking sites to sort of encourage them to be better performers. Again, it's about getting the data earlier and, again, identifying problems, preventing them from propagating into larger issues.
So Jeff, what kind of information technology do you use to leverage that?
We've used, there's a lot of software as a service, cloud-based. We're using Trial Master File. We're using, this isn't a plug, but we're using Viva for Trial Master Files. And again, we've been able to put the sites to upload their data. And so we can get a look at it more real time. We've used, especially with a virtual company, people traveling all over, we use electronic signature tools so that people don't have to go back to hotels, try to print things, scan things, sign things. Again, we've found Part 11 solutions to do them so that we make sure we have some of those on our own side. There's audit trails and data integrity from our side. But those types of things should be commonplace, and unfortunately there are still many paper systems, and people are afraid to use technology because they think it adds risk, where in fact it's reducing your risk, and it is making you more efficient and more effective.
So what are some of the more unique challenges? I think you touched on that. I mean, people are averse to using it, for example, you going out and you've got a clinical study going on, right? What challenges, I mean, you could say that those late data entry, you incentivize them, but what challenges other than, have you uncovered in those areas?
There are people that again are hesitant to do new things. A lot of success we've had in rolling out things like a Part 11 signature tool is starting small, starting with just a few different applications, a group that's willing to take on the challenge or take on something new that they want to use new technology, that are also influencers within the organization, so that when they have success, they'll tell their colleagues and they'll say, hey, this is easy, hey, this is better than printing things out, hey, we've got better control. And same with when we rolled out electronic TMFs. We started on a smaller study. We didn't just go full bore on our pivotal phase 3. We got lessons learned, and we grew into it.
So, Aaron, what has been your experience of quality management software?
So my experience tends to be more around both the training and some of the paperwork side and laboratory systems. It's really hit or miss. But a lot of that has to do with two things. One, understand the software before you purchase it. That is really important. A lot of people will have they will immediately just buy something because they feel that, I heard it was really good and it really worked out. Well, there are a lot of aspects to it that you need to understand and work with the software provider to make it your system, to make it something that works with yours. And then back to something Jeff was saying. It really has to do with company culture as well. The best software system will be will be less than useful when the company is not prepared to go ahead and truly implement it in the way that it does, because it requires upfront planning, time, training, and the ability to really phase it in a way that makes sense. So my experience is that it's been good, but it really does depend on how well you prepare for it, how well you plan for it, and whether or not your company or your group is truly ready and willing to take it on.
Let me just add to some of that. Part of it, my concerns with some of the systems are they have lots of capability. So you can configure, you can customize, you can do all kinds of things. And to me, a lot of it comes back to reducing the complexity, getting more simple solutions. A lot of the out-of-the-box solutions are great for being validation ready, but you can do small changes that can make big differences. A lot of these systems have been designed with a lot of big pharma in mind. And so there's one I'm just working on recently that had essentially 10 steps in an approval cycle of a particular workflow. We were able to knock that down to 4 for our smaller organization. Again, we don't have we have a lot of people wearing multiple hats, so QA is document control, there isn't separate functions, for example. So it is understanding the software, and it's also trying to eliminate complexity where you can, because it's going to end up, we could have just gone out of the box, we'd be validated, and people would be hesitant to adopt and really roll out and use it because it was too difficult or too time consuming, or they couldn't be trained unless you were a super user. So those are some of the solutions we're working towards.
So these quality management systems are usually add-ons to existing legacy systems, or something you toss on top, or what is it?
Well, for me, fortunately, I don't have to deal with a legacy system. There are lots of challenges folks have with essentially things that have been in place for a long time. And certainly the transition to newer systems presents all kinds of challenges, both technically, culturally, operationally.
Yeah. What's your experience with that, Aaron?
Whenever you try to put something on top of a legacy system, whether it's a legacy software system or trying to take what you had from a paper-based system and turn it into simply a software, turn it into a software system, those have been less than successful. They're at first they seem like a good idea because, okay, we don't have to change our system that much, but software, especially software that is going to streamline an effort, you really need to sit with and understand what you want to do, and then how you're going to make your current system better. So I would say this: unless there's a true drive to have to be on top of a legacy system, I would take a look at the software and see if there's a way for you to rethink the way you do the business, and so that quality can improve and be enhanced, as opposed to just kind of doing the same thing you usually do, but only using software.
Just to add in another aspect that helps ensure success is if you bring in a person strictly to run the software, they're not necessarily going to understand operationally what it's supposed to do. So having people doing the work, also implementing the software and setting up true user requirements, not creating new functions, but using the existing functions, existing users to at least understand what the current requirements are and where they want to go. That has a theme that we can talk about with a lot of other questions, where people need to see the bigger picture and not be just so focused in on just getting their system to run. You can have the greatest system, but if nothing flows through it, you're not getting any of the quality system benefits.
Yeah, I always liken that it's the contractor who fixates with his circular saw, but he can't cut a straight line. What's that all about? So, but let's stick with that for a minute, because I know a lot of folks in the audience. So what are these promising technologies, and what do you do with your IT investments, Jeff, that you can really scale these out across the whole landscape of your business?
I'm sorry, can you say again?
What are what technologies have you brought in that do this, right? question one. And once you bring this stuff in, how do you get everybody in every department to get the buy-in?
So yeah, and I referred to that before. There's a variety of different software packages that we're implementing on a modular basis so that we can take it stepwise. We're not trying to eat the whole apple in one bite. We're you know, it's a long-term process. We've been doing it for a few years. We're continuing to add on other modules, and so using IT solutions and finding sort of the low-hanging fruit to start, the early adopters that are willing to again, basically carry the message to the rest of the organization, and having management support, not just from quality management, but across the organization to roll these out has been key to some of our success to this point.
One of the things I've seen is that the quality systems are phase specific. For example, your early phase has got their own quality system, late phase and operations has another quality systems. What's your feel on that?
So my feel is that the systems don't need to be separate. There should be different expectations, right? I mean, the ICH even talks about things being phase change control and investigations being phase appropriate, right? So if you don't have a validated process yet, things may uncover themselves during development batches. Great, let's learn from those. As you go further through your development cycle, yes, you need to have higher standards, better change control. Things are now filed with FDA. There's greater implications. But that doesn't mean that you can't have similar systems. You can have less signatures. You can require less formal documentation earlier on, especially as you get further and earlier and earlier in the process. So I think there's a lot of benefit to also having folks being able to operate across the life cycle. So they're taking that product through development, understanding the history once they get to commercialization. And so if you're not forcing people to totally change systems, it doesn't mean you can't have different numbering or different requirements, but operating within, for example, the same quality management system software, operating within the same SOP system, those things to me make a lot of sense and help with in both the earlier phase and the longer term, bigger picture of bringing something to commercial scale.
So Aaron, why don't we get into that? ICH triggered, not all good memories, but some memories. So anyway, why don't we talk about the globalization aspect? And we're working here. We're in Pennsylvania. We're in New York City, but we're doing our work in Ireland.
So globalization and the idea that you're working all over. It could be Europe. It could be like you said. It could be Ireland. It could be Spain. It could be India, China, the Middle East. You could be putting down a lot of that, and then you're working in the U.S. and you're working in South America, and so. One of the bigger challenges becomes, as a quality group, is being able to make sure you can control quality in all those spaces, taking into account all the things that come around. The distance from what would be the home base, you've got different cultures, you've got different groups that are being hired on. You might be buying companies and bringing them into the fold. All of those things really present challenges because, as a quality, working within a quality group, you want things to be done in a consistent and efficient manner. But you also recognize that there are going to be different ways to approach things, and sitting down and figuring out what do we need to create that it runs across our global quality system, policies and potentially procedures, and what things are we going to leave to the individual places. That is probably the biggest challenge that I'm seeing. I've seen companies
they've been reactive. So something came up and they decided, okay, we're going to standardize everything globally. And then they find out what a huge challenge that is. And it becomes a real issue. It's multiple years and levels of success vary. All the way to companies that say, look, we're going to be up at a very specific level, at a policy level, and we'll do some audits. And if we catch things, then we'll ask them to deal with it in their own way, so that we're controlling quality at the policy level and utilizing audits. It is one of the areas that I see a lot of different approaches and a lot of challenges.
So Jeff, why don't you take a run at that one too?
Sure.
I know you're rich, and I seen you chomping there.
Yeah, sure. No, so there's in some ways, I'm encouraged that requirements often seem like they're very slowly converging and having some commonality. Just saw recently where FDA and EU are going to recognize each other's facility inspections. We'll see if it happens or how it happens, but I think that's for the greater good, getting those inspection resources allocated better. So there are good things that are happening that way. I think where possible, keeping in mind other countries' requirements can help with, for example, product development. We're currently developing a product, and we have determined early on, even though it's going to be focused on U.S. commercialization, we have to keep Europe in mind. We've got both suppliers that are qualified for Europe, and we've used not just USP, but also EP and JP excipients that meet all three, so that we're ready for that. So you can't always be ready for every region's requirements, but where it makes sense and where there's where it doesn't require overwhelming efforts, then keeping those things in mind and operating that way is helpful. The corporate requirements being pushed down onto local folks is a balancing act. You do want to have standards. The local folks do need to have some control over what they're doing, because if you just push it down on them, they're not going to buy in, and it's not going to get implemented very well. So these are all issues that require some balance.
So let me just, comes to mind is, so you're gonna, I want this to meet EP, JP, USP, whatever.
Right.
That really puts a lot of pressure on the suppliers and your business partners, and how do you manage that relationship in that case?
So fortunately, our formulation isn't overwhelming, so we don't have, there aren't too many additional requirements that puts in place, and we try to select suppliers that can handle multiple requirements. But just in general, the need to collaborate now is true today more than ever. We've got a supply chain that isn't even too complicated, and yet there are all kinds of additional requirements we need to keep in mind, and we have to have suppliers that can, if they can't handle those requirements, or if they don't have that capacity, figuring out alternatives. And really it's about getting out in front of those issues, especially as we try to scale up and launch products. It's about communicating, it's about sharing information, both on our side and on their side, so that we can all make better decisions, see the bigger picture and make better decisions. And it's treating each other professionally. It's a certain authenticity to it. If you are going to be bringing in a second supplier, let's not pretend like one supplier's got all the business. They're big boys. They understand that you need to assure your supply chain and have alternatives, but deal with people honestly, deal with them, with integrity and with authenticity, and they'll work with you and understand that this is what's best for the product and for the project.
Well, who's the point contact when you do stuff? Like, you're going to go out and find this supplier? Or
yeah, so I've been very fortunate in my career, not just at Trevena, but in previous roles, where I've had very good relationships with my manufacturing, development, supply chain groups. And there's overlap in those groups depending on the companies that you're talking with. But if quality is treated as as somebody at arm's length that really, we'll bring them in later once we know what we're doing, and once we'll tell them what we're doing, and if they're given no time, there ends up being conflicts, there ends up being emergencies, and really getting folks involved earlier, and my manufacturing guys are, again, if all the quality requirements are coming from the quality group, that's a problem. I mean, it's quality by design, it's not designed by quality. So working together to get out in front of issues and really prevent the problems. I mean, we don't get rewarded for preventing the fires, we usually get rewarded for putting out the fires, but we know the right things to do, and understanding the supply chain, understanding capabilities, not telling me here's the supplier, not saying here's the supplier, go audit them and qualify them because we're making a batch next week.
Processing,
That,
in
that
conjunction
doesn't
with
work.
INTERPHEX
That
2017
leads to
presents
to
INTERPHEX
problems. But
Live.
if you're upfront and again dealing with people in a straightforward way, those relationships become very productive.
So while we're talking about the personnel issues, I mean, there's folks that they think the quality is the product. I mean, not that the product has to have the quality. They kind of get lost, whereas I don't think they get the big picture. So whereas they see the forest but not the trees. So what's been, how do you bring the people around in that case, Aaron? I mean, you've been at a couple of companies.
One of the things I've seen, especially in training in pharmaceutical companies, is that day one, you get an overview, you get an understanding, and you're told your contribution, no matter where you are in the company, is contributing to the safety and effectiveness of whatever it is, the drug, the medical device that's going to go out the door. But I think that if you stop there and then throw people into their groups, and then they just, that's all they see. They're a cog. They're working in the machine. They don't necessarily see the entire piece and how it contributes. I think I would like to see, and I've seen some success, and it happens in smaller companies where they get together and a couple of things. One, they get together and they talk about, hey, this is how the quality group works with you. This is how the quality group wants to is part of the entire piece, so that everybody across the company has a firm understanding of what the quality group is doing and the challenges that it has and how it wants to work with you. Now, that requires a quality group that wants to work. That, as Jeff was saying, it's not designed by quality; it's quality by design. That the quality group wants to work with you. So if you have that, then really don't make it just day one training. Make it relatively consistent message, like that everybody's part of quality, and here's how you contribute to the quality, and of the product. And then number two that you want to do is really. It's not just consistent training necessarily, but it is it's also just having a firm understanding of what your group is doing, from that standpoint, and where it fits in, and making sure that you just repeat that and get that message out.
It's nice that you said that, Aaron, because we just did a lunch and learn at my company where we explained what quality is and what we do. And this wasn't just to GMP, GCP, GLP people. This was to discovery and finance, and so people really understood. Part of what I started with, a couple of things. One is, what is quality, right? Ask somebody to define quality. Everybody kind of is like, I kind of know. I like to use conformance to requirements, and everybody could kind of get it in their head what that meant. The other part is emphasizing that quality isn't just the quality department. Everybody is responsible for helping meet those requirements. And there was a nice little Dilbert cartoon that I liked, that was basically where he said, quality is the most important thing. And then somebody raised their hand. What about safety? Well, okay, I guess, what about responsibility to shareholders? Well, okay, the point is quality isn't the priority. Quality is a principle about meeting requirements, about doing things in a standard way, reducing variability, preventing problems. And again, that's something that goes across the organization, not just within the quality group. And I think communicating that on a consistent basis through the organization, through the supply chain, can help achieve those results.
And I'd like to add just one thing. I think that another area that can really help is cross-training. And it's difficult to implement. It's not always easy to do. But if you can, and if you have the opportunity, having a few people cross-train and get into the quality-driven side of whatever they're doing can really give people a good perspective, and they can take that back to their group and give them an understanding. And I think that can help contribute, allowing them to work on what they're supposed to be doing, but really truly understanding the forest.
Yeah, I like that as well. One of the things I've tried to do with quality within the quality group is have people responsible for a product line, have them responsible. So when you're making a batch decision, you've been to the facility, you've done the audit. Or, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to know analytical chemistry and microbiology and manufacturing and stability. You don't need to, but you do have to have sort of a broad understanding of how those dots connect, so that when there is a complaint from the field and you see it, you say, we had this issue in production. Or if there is an in-process check that's becoming troublesome, say, well, there's a stability issue that we've had. It's being able to see that bigger picture, having people with multiple skills. And really, you need good people to make all of this work. That, I think, is how we can get some of the efficiencies and effectiveness of our systems.
What I've seen with a lot of firms is they have a playbook manual. It's not an SOP. And what it does is it's the story of how you take it from discovery to peak sales. And it talks about all the nodes and all the decision points. Some companies put this together and they call it a manual, development manual, a progress manual, whatever. That's one thing. What that is a brain dump from everybody in the company. I just want to shift over to one thing that we had talked about, and that would be one of the things I find with cross-training becomes imperative. Everybody thinks they understand what risk-based approaches are. So Jeff, why don't we start with what your understanding and how you use it, and then we'll get into that part of the discussion.
So, a lot of times there's some formality around it, and people want to start, when somebody says risk-based, they have to do an FMEA, and it becomes, again, this complex exercise. And sometimes that's very appropriate, especially as we lead into, say, process validation. But there's different issues that come up, for example, within a production run, within a deviation, where essentially you need to assign a risk. Tell me how this is going to impact patients. Tell me, is there a way to mitigate it? And really doing something as simple as low, medium, and high, as a basic concept to get people's minds around what are we dealing with here? Because otherwise, if we just say there's a problem, then you treat every problem the same way, and that's not really, when we talk about efficient, it's not the best way to use resources. We do need to focus on the critical few, not the trivial many. And I think using risk management approaches helps us with that. It's a tool. It's another tool in the toolbox that quality groups, engineering groups need to use.
And who owns that usually in your particular case? Who's the owner, and how do they get it across the organization? Is that something that comes out of your area?
You know what, a lot of times it's a blur as far as trying to remember where the genesis of it was. We have a pretty experienced group, and we talk about these things, and different folks have done different things in their different roles at different jobs. And so there becomes this discussion, and it sort of evolves and sort of centers around coming up with the right approach for our organization at this time.
What's been your experience with that, Aaron? Or not, as the case may be. Risk-based.
Risk-based, thank you. So risk-based approach, one of the things that I've experienced is that I will see companies do the same thing over and over and over again for something they already know. They already understand the risk. The risk is well understood and done, and you end up just going through that process again and again and again. One of my favorite is when you have a new facility and you're bringing a new facility with new equipment on board, taking a risk-based approach to how those systems are going to be, which ones are going to be qualified and validated, and how they're going to be done. You'll see some companies will every single time go through a process of determining whether or not a water for injection system requires qualification. It does. You'll see them argue about which components are critical. Those are pretty much set at this point. Everyone understands that. And I really, and that's one area. So my experience is that, you need to know, you need to take your collective understanding of certain things and be able to say, okay, we know this is high risk, we know this is low risk, we know what we need to do, and we already know how we address it. So to Jeff's point around that, being able to you don't have to be a slave to, let's say, FMEA. FMEA is a tool. If it works for what you're trying to do, that's good. But otherwise, spending a lot of time and energy when you already have categorized and understand these risks, go back, take that history, understand it, and then deal with it at that time in that way, because you've already done the work. So it's, and when you talk about ownership, I think that as an overall group, when you talk about risk-based approach, the quality group does tend to be the one that people look to, but whether or not they actually own that process, that all depends on the company, and in some cases, nobody owns it. In other words, even not the process, but the idea. There's nobody pushing that. So it could be viewed as a manufacturing risk assessment. It could be viewed as a procedural risk assessment. You could look at a lot of things, but you would want quality to kind of own it. But in many cases, there's nobody owning it, and you end up with just every last different approach to the same problems over and over, and you want to see that change.
The only reason I asked the question is it's always fallen on the development guys when we're talking pre-validation. But you're right. I've seen this come out of quality QA. I've seen it come out of production. QA seems to own the mechanism. It's not that it's their idea, it's like everything else. So I think we're going to try to bring this round. I would say, let's talk about what is the optimal situation in the real world, all right? We'll start with Jeff. But what would be the optimal situation here? So everybody's quality-minded, but what?
Well, optimal situation, everybody's right, everybody's quality-minded. We have processes that are well understood, so we understand how the inputs affect the outputs, how the people, or hopefully you can remove people from the process as much as possible, that your equipment is qualified, you understand how it performs, and you've got a well-characterized product from both a performance basis, stability basis, how it impacts the patients. Optimally, it would go out to the marketplace, you would sell lots of it, it would have no complaints, it would have no adverse events, and we would file annual reports that were nice and thin with minimal changes because we got it all right up front. That would be, you asked for optimal. I'm not sure it's realistic or I've seen it happen, but that would be optimal.
I think as an industry, we're moving definitely in that direction. I mean, the process changes we've seen, I think now you can almost say that they are, it's an equal, it's steady. It's not going to be any of the odd stuff. And usually the odd stuff is the one you don't expect. So there's always going to be something outside. Somebody changed the crystallization rate, somebody changed the dryer, somebody changed something. And somehow, somewhere, it got through the net. So Aaron, optimal state?
So an optimal state, I think for quality is a couple of things. Obviously, a well-trained group of employees who understands quality and work toward and drives towards it. But I want to throw another piece in there and add to what Jeff was saying, and really say that flexibility is important. Within quality, you want to have people who not only can follow the rules, as it were, but who also within that understand and have the flexibility to be able to handle the situations you were talking about. There's always something. Somebody changed a dryer temp. Somebody didn't do something right, and instead of that stopping things dead, instead of that turning into a problem or something swept under the carpet, you want to have a quality system and a quality group that has the flexibility to be able to handle that, deal with that, roll with that particular punch, and then continue moving and continuing to put out good, strong product and effective products.
Well, I think we're about towards the end of our time. Jeff, I want to thank you for the time. Aaron.
Thank you.
And,
Thank you for having us.
That's it for our session on realizing benefits.
Pharmaceutical Processing, in conjunction with INTERPHEX 2017, presents INTERPHEX Live.